Welcome to BarChat, the Connecticut Bar Association series of video interviews with leaders in the law and in business. My name is Doug Brown. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Bar Association and your host today. Our topic is how our member attorneys helped ensure a free and fair election on November 4th, 2014. My guests are the attorneys who represented both the Democrat and Republican parties on Election Day. Kevin Reynolds is a principal in the Reynolds Strategy Group and was a former principal at the law firm of Updike, Kelly, and Spellacy. When there, he served as chair of the firm's Government Relations and Public Affairs Practice Group for 8 years. Since 2000, Mr. Reynolds has served as the legal counsel for the Connecticut Democratic Party. Prior to attending law school, he served for several years on the legislative staff of U.S. Senator Christopher Dodd. As a lawyer, Mr. Reynolds also routinely handles matters in the areas of administrative, elections, and municipal law. He is a long-term Connecticut Bar Association member, and he serves in a leadership capacity in a number of other professional, political, and community organizations. Attorney Reynolds received his Juris Doctor degree at the University of Virginia School of Law and his A.B. at Kenyon College in Ohio. Welcome, Steve. Michael Goldfarb is a trial attorney who represents businesses, government entities, and individuals in a broad range of complex civil litigation matters. He is an associate at Murtha, Cullina, and maintains an active election law and government investigations practice. He serves as general counsel and second vice chair to the Connecticut Republican Party and has counseled and litigated cases on behalf of candidates for statewide and federal offices. He makes frequent appearances as a legal commentator regarding election law matters and government investigations. He's also an active Connecticut Bar Association member and is a member of our House of Delegates and on the Litigation Section Executive Committee. He earned his J.D. magna cum laude from St. John's University School of Law and his A.B. at Brandeis University. Welcome. What we want to do today is have just a conversation about the activities there, and just to set the stage. Some may remember we had issues with registrars' lists of who's eligible to vote being late to some of the polling places, which resulted in some litigation, which brought you guys together in court on the differing sides. Before we get into kind of that, I wanted to kind of get your views on why you think it's important to have lawyers involved in the oversight of the election process. Maybe we'll start with you, Kevin.
Sure. The advantage having lawyers involved is on Election Day, when problems arrive, you need an urgent solution. Mm-hmm. So you need a person who is comfortable resolving an issue orally and will have the confidence to present the problem to the election officials and also the wherewithal to help guide them to a solution that works. And the solution typically is allow the person to vote, mm-hmm. as long as they're properly registered. Mm-hmm. And that's where the skills of a lawyer are very helpful.
Sure. What's your view?
Yeah, I agree. And what I would add to that as well is that at polling locations, the election officials, for the most part, they're trying to do their best. But this is a job that is done once a year. And so, and there's limited training. And so despite people's best efforts, there are often mistakes. And so having lawyers present at polling locations ensures that the laws and the rules are going to be followed correctly, which ensures a fair election for everybody.
What do you look for on Election Day? I mean, are you sitting in a room waiting for something to happen? Are you at your office doing regular work? Tell me, how's that day like for you in that role?
So, each of the parties, I can tell you from the Republican perspective, we had people standing by in their office ready to go to court if that was necessary, and we also had a team of lawyers at polling locations across the state observing to make sure that the rules were being properly followed. And so at a polling location, we would be observing, is the person who's checking people in requesting the correct ID? If someone doesn't have an ID or they're not on the voter roll, are they given the correct instructions of what to do? Things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Well, on the Democratic side, in 1992, I was a young associate and I was asked to help out on Election Day. Mm-hmm. So I showed up there at what was the campaign headquarters for the Clinton, Gore, and Chris Dodd campaign. Mm-hmm. And we had 3 people in one phone. And that was it. Fast forward to 2014, we were in a boiler room, a conference room at a law firm that we were using that day, next to the main room for the Malloy campaign. And we had around the table 8 lawyers. We already did a dry run through the previous Friday to see how things would work. We had numerous phone lines, computers set up, and then we had a team of lawyers deployed throughout the state. So we've, from the Democratic Party perspective, we have really elevated the way we handle Election Day. It's quite remarkable to me.
Yeah, I mean that really ties in well. You've each got your own clients you're representing on Election Day, and then the bar associations worked separately with the Secretary of State for the Secretary's Legal Assistance Program. We had 70 bar association members representing the Secretary of State ready to deploy into polling locations if reports had come up. Did you all interact with that group as part of this thing in Hartford?
We didn't with the lawyers from the Bar Association. We're aware they're out there. And I'd like to point out something that hasn't been in the media, and I don't know if Mike agrees or not, but in my years doing Election Day lawyering, this was by far the smoothest, least problematic Election Day that I can recall, with the exception of Hartford, which was an enormous exception. But I think a lot of the credit does go to the fact that both parties have lawyers out there who are working. And I wasn't aware of any allegations of Republican attorneys acting improperly. I haven't heard of any Democratic lawyers acting improperly. For the most part, the lawyers from both parties, plus the CBA, are out there trying to ensure that the process is followed. And Mike made a great point when he said the elections are once a year. You have people working there, so they're going to be rusty, they're going to be unfamiliar, and so the lawyers from all sides play a role. And I think that's one reason why we really had very few problems on a day when there was high election voter turnout. So that's why I'd credit the Secretary of State's the staff there in the Secretary of State for working with the Bar Association.
Yeah, a lot of lawyers giving. I mean, you're all working for your clients, but a lot of lawyers in general working. Kind of showing all sides of the house to try to make the process go. So Evan, when your team how did the issue in Hartford first come to light? We'll go back and forth. How did you first learn about what happened in Hartford, and what did your team do as a result of that?
Well, initially we had people in the polling locations, and so they were aware of the issue as it was happening, and so they reported into our central office of the situation, and from our perspective, it was just wait and see. We figured that the Democrats would run to court and ask to keep the polling locations open later, so we had people getting ready to draft the opposition brief to that, as well as drafting affidavits and of the witnesses who are on the scene, and getting them ready to testify in court if that was going to be necessary. And
so you all initiated the action. Tell what happened in your war room.
Well, we were sitting in the war room. This year, we again elevating our approach. We were asked to be there at 5:30 in the morning. So most of the people in the boiler room were, and then all of a sudden at 5:55 we had a call from one of our lawyers outside one of the polling places, I think the one near the UConn Law School, and the report was that there's no voter list here. And then that was a concern, and then 1 minute later another phone call from another polling place, no voter list. Then that person said, hold on a second, they're just arriving. So we figured everything seems fine. Then right after 6 o'clock, more calls, and we're getting reports that the voter lists aren't here, but they're allowing people to vote. No one was sure what process they were following. Then we're getting calls from other polling places, they're not letting people vote. People are in line, people are walking away, and so the problem began to just worsen. And I called it the chair of the Hartford Democratic Town Committee. He was aware of it, he knew what the problem was, that the voter list hadn't left City Hall until I think it was 5:15. And unfortunately, they didn't leave in 20 vehicles. It looks like they left in 1 or 2. I'm still not even sure. So the problem was getting worse and worse. We got an isolated polling place that was actually functioning. But the other disturbing concern was that some polling places were saying, go ahead and vote. Others were saying, you can't. I was calling the Secretary of State's office, getting one piece of advice, which is, yes, people can vote as long as they write down their name and their address. And then another lawyer 4 seats down from me is talking to someone else in the Secretary of State's office who's saying, no one can vote. So the confusion was vast. So I think early on, I forget when, I was thinking when I called the Republican attorneys, there's 2 attorneys who work with Mike, that I dealt with on election day, Pete Martin and Herb Shepherdson. I'm not sure when I called Pete at first to alert to them, but we were concerned in that this is an issue.
So you guys are your camps are talking to
Yes.
each other during this. You're not just waiting to find out what's filed in court.
We've had a very collaborative relationship. It was 4 years ago that Peter Martin called me up and said, what do you think about making sure that there's a judge available to handle matters from 5 o'clock till the close of election? And so we jointly went to the Judicial Department, made that request, and they agreed.
So you knew you were going to have to do something. You knew your camp knew that something was going to happen, and you knew where you were going to go, and
from our
judge was going to be
perspective,
there.
we first had to gather, the lawyers were gathering the facts to see what happened, and then
Right.
determining what could we do if we went to court. Of course, we're reading online at the same time the reports. There's sources in the campaign telling the reporters we're going to court. Well, we were going to court before we knew we were going to court. But once that happened, then we
Sometimes that happens in the media, right?
Then we got our subset of lawyers working on the papers to go to court. We called the judge's office as instructed to alert them that we were going to be going to court. We alerted the Republican Party. We then drafted the document. We sent that out to the Republicans, and then e-filed it with the court as instructed. And then we're giving, I think, a 2:30 court time.
Mm-hmm. So the parties and the judiciary worked together to have a process so there weren't really any surprises. You knew what playbook you had to run even before you knew what issues
Correct.
there were. So when you went to court, what remedy were you seeking?
Well, when the party went to court, we were hoping to keep there were 10 polling places where the voter list didn't show up on time. We wanted each of the 10 to be kept open for 1 hour additional beyond the 8 o'clock time, and that was our request.
And so you get that request, and obviously there was a controversy. If you agreed, we probably wouldn't be sitting here. So what was the Republicans' view on what the Democrats wanted to do, and what was the issue on the Republican side?
Sure. So from our perspective, although some people may have had difficulty voting within the first hour that the polling locations were open, the issue, we didn't think that it was necessary to keep the polling locations open later because people still had 13 plus hours in the day to vote. And there was no, let's say, proof that somebody who walked away at 6:30 a.m. needed to be there at, between 8:30 and 9 p.m. to vote. Why can't that person come between 7:30 and 8? And unless you talk to that person to find out specifically why they can't make it within those 13 hours, it just didn't seem like it was necessary, which is a real contrast to 2010 in Bridgeport, where the problem happened in the late afternoon and the evening, and at that point, there's very few hours left in the day,
Sure.
And so it was much more reasonable to keep the polling location open later.
Well, the average citizen might say, well, what's the harm in leaving it open an hour later? What was the Republican position on why the harm would?
Well, the harm is fairness to the entire electorate. There's 169 municipalities. Why does Hartford get to stay open an hour later and every other municipality have to close at 8 p.m.?
Sure.
And so you need to follow the same rules everywhere to ensure a fair election.
So you were asking, the Democrats were asking for an hour. We actually wound up with a half an hour at just those polling places. How did that come to pass in your going through? It wasn't just split the difference, right? There was some principle behind the decision.
When we went to court, we provided evidence. We put two witnesses forward from two particular polling places who testified they showed up to vote, were unable to vote. And that essentially what Judge Schuman decided was, based on the evidence, he could justify keeping the two polling places open, recognizing he's got to balance the concerns that Michael addressed. But he, since we didn't provide any witnesses or any evidence relating to the other 8 polling places, he refused to extend the time there.
So it was just extended for a half an hour at 2 of the 8 polling places?
Right. Or was it even an hour? I can't remember if it was a half hour.
Yeah, it was a half hour. And I would just chime in that, this is a program for lawyers, and so the reason for the result, it was good lawyering, I think, on behalf of it was lawyering. So they put on evidence of 2 locations, and I believe the Republicans put on evidence perhaps of other locations saying, nope, we didn't experience the problems here. And it was based on the evidence that the judge concluded that it was reasonable to keep these particular locations open, but not every location in Hartford.
So it's traditional lawyering, presenting the evidence of where the harm is, fashioning the remedy to that, not a political basis based on anything else, as far as we know.
It was exactly based on the evidence. And the core of our argument was, under the statutes, the polling places are supposed to be open for 14 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So then that's the fairness to the electorate. To allow it to be open for 14 hours, you need to extend the time.
Okay. So after the judge made the decision, you all were still watching to see what happened, and did everything go smoothly after that?
Yes. Well, Hartford had a number of other problems at various polling places, machines breaking down, uncertainty what to do if the machine broke down. But for the most part, things worked out, and the turnout after 8 o'clock at the two polling places was very minimal. Now, there was a lot of publicity about it, which probably helped in to get out the vote effort. The controversy, I think, probably raised the attention level in the public in Hartford to voting. So that may have led to a few more people voting.
Sure. Any other thought? I want to move on to talk about another topic for a moment. Or any other thoughts that you had on how the controversy was resolved?
Yeah, I think it was a very reasonable resolution, and as Kevin said, ultimately, I was at one of the polling locations that stayed open later to make sure that the proper protocols were followed. They did establish special protocols for what would happen after 8, between 8 and 8:30. Made sure that those were done, and ultimately, only 11 people took advantage of the extra half hour between the two locations. So,
well, one of the things I think this is a great example of is, as lawyers, we have to zealously advocate for our clients and be against one another in a court, yet we can sit and have a conversation about it and agree to disagree. And I think we understand here, even in the context of a heated political debate, that we can all get along and focus on the rule of law and make that happen. I know you guys are both active in the Bar Association, and we're grateful for all of your work there. Do you have any thoughts on how being able to have relationships with your fellow attorneys outside of an adversarial context kind of helps you serve your clients and as part of the profession?
Well, I think it's critical. Yeah, I think that's. I've not practiced in other states, but I do know from friends of mine who represent who are lawyers practicing in other states. The collegiality of the Connecticut bar, I think, is an excellent attribute to the state.
Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I would echo that. Prior to coming to Connecticut, I practiced in New York and California, and I can say that, far and away, Connecticut is the most collegial place I've ever practiced. And I attribute that to a couple things. One, we have a small bar, and two, we have a strong bar association. And so we see each other on a regular basis, and many of us, become friends and have a personal relationship outside, and that does assist my clients because, you can cut through a lot of the pretense that you might have at the start of litigation with somebody else where there's distrust. And if I trust the other lawyer on the other side, we can negotiate discovery disputes a lot quicker. Perhaps we can get to settlement a lot quicker and do what's in the best interest for the client.
Sure, yeah, you skip all the posturing because you know each other in other contexts.
Absolutely.
One of the things we've observed through Bill Chapman and our legislative lobbying is how few lawyers there are as lawyer legislators. We have a tradition in our United States of having a strong lawyer legislator contingent. I'm not saying they should all be lawyers, but the statistics now, only 23 of our 151 House members are lawyers, and only 8 of the 36 state senators are lawyers. And I was interested in your thoughts on how this might impact our legislation and the importance of having lawyers actually hold elected office in addition to the work supervising elections. Sure. Start with you, Evan.
I think that one of the benefits of having lawyers be legislators is that we have, an understanding of nuance of language and its meaning in a statute, as well as having an understanding of how statutes interplay with one another and needing to form a cohesive body of law that perhaps lay people don't appreciate as much or don't understand as much. I think that part of the problem, or one of the reasons why we don't see as many lawyers getting into the legislature is because we have a part-time legislature and it just doesn't pay enough, and perhaps many qualified people who would otherwise do it can't afford or feel that they can't afford to do that public service.
Sure.
So I've represented clients as a lobbyist for the Connecticut General Assembly for a number of years, and Bill Chapman informed me of the numbers you just read, and I was stunned by it. I've been up there lobbying since 1995-96. I had no idea that the number of lawyers in the General Assembly had dropped to that degree, and it's regrettable. I can tell you there's still a number of lawyers in the key positions in leadership, in the chairs, and I guess the concern will be as those folks move on, who will replace them. Not that there aren't a lot of excellent legislators who aren't lawyers, but there's a great advantage when you're negotiating legislation or if you're explaining an issue to people on the other side of the table. If they're lawyers, it makes it a lot easier sometimes to have them understand the problem and then work to find a good solution. So it's very important. The big problem, I think, is exactly what Mike said. Having a part-time legislature makes it very difficult to hold down a job at a law firm, whether it's a bigger law firm or a small law firm. The ones who do it, I marvel at. I really do, and it's very, very, very hard. It's hard for a law firm to allow an attorney to spend time up at the Capitol and not billing time, and it's hard for the legislator to travel. Imagine the ones who work in Stamford and travel all the way down here. So it is a problem. It's something. If I had my way, I would shrink the size of the General Assembly by a third, and I would make them full-time legislators. I think the state would be better served.
Do you think the elections process also inhibits people in terms of how much money it costs to get elected?
Well, I think under the new public financing system, which has its positive aspects and its negative aspects, one positive aspect is that raising money is less time-consuming, less difficult. So if anything, I would think that might, and I'm sure that's a factor for some people, but I think that's less of a factor now than it might have been.
Good. Do you have any other thoughts on lawyers in the legislature?
Not particularly about that, but about, I would agree with Kevin about raising money. The CEP program does make it a lot easier for people to run, and it also sort of evens out the disparity where an incumbent would usually have a huge advantage. Now, since most of the the state house and senators are using the program, they're going to be on equal footing. So.
Well, and would you encourage lawyers who are looking to give back to consider running for office as part of what they should be doing for the community?
Well, I think if they can afford the time to do it, it's a great way to help the state.
Yeah, I think there's real value in how lawyers were trained. We don't even realize it. I spent a lot of years in business, and until you move out of the legal practice, you don't realize how we're trained to process information differently than people who don't have legal training. So even having lawyers in the legislature to explain the more intricate aspects of things to the lay legislators, I think could be very valuable.
Very much so.
Well, just one last question for you today in the time we have left. You guys are both very active in the Connecticut Bar Association, and we're grateful for that. And I just want to get your thoughts on what being active in the Bar Association has meant to you and to your career.
Go first.
Sure. So I got involved beginning with the Young Lawyer section. Was on the executive committee there, and did both their litigation committee and their government affairs committee. And actually, I attribute that experience to getting my start in election law, and that really has helped propel my career and into the position that I now am as general counsel. So I think it's great for networking as well, meeting people and building your resume that you can go on to do the things you want to do in your career.
Terrific, thanks.
When I started out up at Kelly and Spellacy back in 1991, that firm put a tremendous emphasis on being involved in the Bar Association. So frankly, a number of the lawyers I know from around the state are people I met in my first several years practicing, going to Bar Association meetings.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being here and sharing your insights today and for your work to preserve an open and fair election. And for Kevin and Michael, I'm Doug Brown for the Connecticut Bar Association, and we'll see you next time.